Hey guys, Urban Architect here, and welcome to the first episode of my new series, Anatomy of, wherein I'll be using Google Earth to go over a lot of the characteristics of certain cities or types of cities, which in today's case will be the cities of the American Midwest. This series will be great for anyone who plays Skylines and is looking for some inspiration, or really anyone who's interested in urban planning at all. And today we're going to be focusing on Cincinnati, St. Louis, and Kansas City, and we're going to look at their geography, layout, architecture, transit, and how to build cities like them within city skylines. So let's get right into it. Now, with the exception of lakeside cities such as Chicago and Milwaukee, all of the major Midwestern cities are located on the rivers that made them such great places to settle centuries ago. Cincinnati is located on the Ohio River, and Kansas City and St. Louis sit atop the Missouri and Mississippi rivers respectively. These great rivers carve through the landscape, and the downtowns of the cities are generally located at the center of those curves. And the American Midwest is also fairly flat, with the only variations being steep riverbanks and a few hills and valleys carved by the creeks that are the tributaries to the rivers. And often you'll find cities like Kansas City located at the intersections of larger tributaries with the main river. Now, Midwestern cities have a fairly standard layout, with medium-sized downtowns and vast suburbs as far as the eye can see. The majority of the suburbs are generally on the same side of the river as the downtown, and very few people actually live in the downtowns themselves, choosing instead to live in the low-density suburbs and commute into work at one of the many office towers which make up the majority of the downtown. There's also very little medium density to separate the downtowns from the suburbs, with any transition mostly being replaced by highways cutting the city apart. The warehouses and rail yards of industry tend to cling to the riversides, with barges being a common sight. Riverside residential development is also a rarity, and since the suburbs that fill the majority of these metro areas are fairly standard for America, today we'll be focusing on the downtown areas of Midwestern cities. Now, Midwestern downtowns are generally located by the rivers and isolated from their suburbs by highways that often surround the core, especially that of Kansas City. And you'll usually see two highways on either side of the downtown, connected by a sunken freeway placed between the financial core and the riverbank, which often has a park. Now, America has a lot of sports, so cities will generally have at least two large stadiums, and these stadiums are generally surrounded by parking and some commercial developments, and will almost never be located directly within the downtown core, but often at its fringes by the highways. Now, like all true American cities, Midwestern cities have an obscene amount of parking in their downtowns for car commuters, and there will always be a lot of blocks left to just surface lots, especially around the fringes, but also occasionally within the downtown itself. And the road grids within the downtowns are really strict, often uninterrupted with very few variations to their square or almost square blocks, until the highways or stadiums force a change. And then on the other side of the highways, the grid would continue as if it was never uninterrupted. And the roads themselves are usually one-way roads within the downtown, and the two-way roads only really start at the edge, and you'll never find a road wider than 5 lanes within the downtown proper. Parks and green spaces will generally be located on the riverside before it gives way to industry. And within the downtown, parks are generally just a few contiguous blocks of green space, with the grid continuing through uninterrupted. And a few minutes out from the downtown is where you'll start seeing larger parks, such as this massive park located in the suburbs of St. Louis. Now, in terms of their skylines, Midwestern cities are generally unremarkable. And the skylines generally don't have extremely tall buildings, and the tallest few are often of very similar heights. The taller towers tend to be newer and are generally a mix of modernist and brutalist architecture. And the somewhat scattered skylines of Midwestern cities are defined by skyscrapers of glass, steel, and concrete, instead of the alder sandstone, brick, and marble. And while there are only a few taller buildings, Midwestern cities tend to have a great deal of mid-rise office towers. And in addition to more recent styles, these office towers tend to have a great deal of Art Deco and Chicago school-styled architecture that no longer dominates the skyline like it used to. Now, the shorter 3 to 10 story brick buildings at the ground level are generally older than the newer corporate skyscrapers that form the skyline, often falling within the Chicago or Sullivan-esque styles of architecture, and these would fit within almost any American city. In addition to those basic tiers, you'll see a smattering of parking garages, older churches, and government buildings, and then some convention centers usually located near the stadiums. You also won't see very much modern contemporary architecture such as condos, and whatever you do see would probably be some newer hotels by the convention centers. These cities don't have very much to separate them from other American cities in terms of unique features, because at least in my opinion, from a planning perspective, the Midwestern American city is the quintessential American city. Now, unfortunately, like most of America, the bar is fairly low for public transit in the Midwest. And the majority of people move around and commute using cars and take advantage of the significant highway networks that connect the vast suburbs to the downtowns. The downtowns themselves are surrounded by a spaghetti of highways that makes driving the easiest way to commute. And public transit is generally underfunded and underused. Though trains did play a significant role in the American expansion into the Midwest, and cities like Kansas City and Cincinnati have grand train stations, they are underused and treated more like museums than transit hubs. And in terms of other transit, St. Louis has some metros and Cincinnati has some streetcars, but beyond that, most cities have only bus lines of questionable quality, and transit within the suburbs is basically a lost cause. The realities of the size of these cities, their low density, and the commuter car culture means that outside of commuter rail, transit development faces an uphill battle in most Midwestern cities. Now, just to finish up the video, I'll quickly go over some tips and recommendations for building this type of city in city skylines. And my first tip is that you should put a lot of extra thought into your road grid and your highways, as your grid will determine where you put your buildings and how your downtown takes shape. I'd recommend almost square blocks large enough to fit 2 buildings on the narrower end. And your highways will determine the borders of your downtown, and your downtown will usually sit by intersections of several different highways. So if you don't want to stress over all the spaghetti, I'd recommend you use some workshop intersections, and this right here is a collection by Timbohs of some really good ones that I'll link in the description. And my next tip is to make sure to spread out your skyline, as Midwestern skylines aren't as uniformly triangular as other skylines, and the tallest buildings don't tend to cling together as much as usual. As you can see, there's quite a lot of distance between these 2 skyscrapers in St. Louis, so make sure you include a lot of mid-rises and parking between your taller buildings. Now, beyond those 2 solid rules, just structure your city like we've described in the rest of the video, and if you have any questions or want further advice, just comment down below or hop into the Discord server where we've got a great little community going. Anyhow, I'll just wrap this up with some Midwestern Skylines asset recommendations that are linked down below and some music. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more of this series. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time in Germany.